Okay, yeah. Good evening. I'm Randy Speck. I'm the chair of ANC 34G. I represent the single-member district that is 34G03, and that's the area that's between Nebraska and Utah and Broad Branch. Welcome to everyone tonight. This is our regular meeting. We meet the second and fourth Mondays of each month, although this month a Monday fell on a holiday, and therefore we did not have another meeting in November. Our next meeting will be December 10th. First thing we'll do is introduce the commissioners, and Shanda just joined us. So Becky, you want to start?
Sure. Hello, my name is Rebecca Madak. I'm 34G04. I have Lafayette Elementary School and Park, so I go from Broad Branch, kind of Tennyson, Utah, Nebraska to Morrison.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Abraham Clayman, and I represent ANC 34G01, which is Hawthorne and Barnaby Woods.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Shanda Tuck Garfield, and I represent ANC 34G02. Welcome. Welcome. I'm Shanda Tuck Garfield.
Speak more closely to the mic.
Yes, I'm in it. Would you want me to talk louder? I can. I really don't need it, but ANC 34G02, that's why I talk low. I used to be a cheerleader, so I can talk loud. I am on the side of the district that's closest to Oregon Avenue and Utah, closest to the park. And welcome, and thank you for coming.
Hello, I'm Jared Mallitz. I represent DDO5, western down the western side of Connecticut to about Military and across to Broad Branch.
Okay, we have a quorum tonight, so we can conduct business. And the first order of business is to adopt our agenda. The agenda was posted on our website, on Chevy Chase listserv, I think on Nextdoor as well. Are there any modifications or changes anyone wants to make? Okay, all in favor?
Can we add an item to address whatever's going on with the security system outside, that horrible meeting? The person at the front desk said that that's been going on for 30 days, and she can't get it taken care of.
Who can't get it? Who is it that can't get it fixed?
The whomever's working at the desk here, that's a horrible meeting.
Okay, well, we'll put Stephanie on that, just see if we can fix that.
Thank you.
Okay.
It's pretty distracting.
Okay. Okay, with the adoption of the agenda, the first item on the agenda is commissioner announcements, and I have several since we haven't met for a month. The first is that the election results, as a result of the November 6th election, all of the incumbent commissioners were re-elected. There is another election coming up, however. That's the special election for the Ward 4 representative on the State Board of Education. There was a vacancy, and that's why it's being held at a different time than the regular election in November. There are 4 candidates: Rhonda Henderson, Ryan Tamelin, Eleni Lawrence, and Fraser O'Leary are running. There is information on each of these candidates at a very helpful website. It's the Coalition for DC Public Schools and Communities, and they ask a number of questions of the candidates that they responded to, and it's an easy way to get to know the candidates and see their positions on various issues affecting DC schools. The next announcement is with regard to the community center modernization. As I think most people know, we received a budget for this modernization that took effect on October 1st for $19 million. And the Department of Parks and Recreation and the Department of General Services have been working on a request for proposal for the architect, the design contractor for that work. However, no RFP has yet been issued. And this is somewhat concerning because there's now been a change in leadership at both the Department of Parks and Recreation and the Department of General Services. And our concern is that we don't want this to delay any further. And I did have a conversation with Councilmember Che about this, and she said that she would send a letter to the Department of General Services and ask the status of the RFP. And so we'll stay on top of that and report back any slippage in that issuance of the RFP. They're still now expecting to have the RFP issued late fall, was what I was told today. There's only a month left in the fall. And then they would be able to issue the contract at the beginning of 2019. Next are some updates on the Ingleside work that's being done there, and particularly the work of the Ingleside Task Force. When we entered a memorandum of understanding with the Ingleside group in 2014, one of the provisions in that agreement was that we would set up a task force that would monitor the work that is being done to make sure that it complied with all of the provisions of the memorandum of understanding, and that would consist of residents in the immediate neighborhood. It also includes a representative from Temple Sinai, a next door neighbor to Ingleside, as well as 2 ANC commissioners. And this task force meets once a month, which we've been meeting pretty much since the beginning of construction. Abe is now on the task force with me. And one provision of the agreement that we had was that if certain of the provisions in the memorandum of understanding were not followed, for instance, things like driving trucks through streets that were prohibited or parking in the neighborhood by some of the construction workers, those kinds of violations of the memorandum of understanding would be subject to fines. And the accumulation of those fines then was left to the Ingleside Task Force to decide the nonprofit that those funds would go to. And so over the course of the last year and a half or so, those fines have been accumulating, and about every quarter the task force has decided where they should be distributed. And just to bring everyone up to date on what's happened thus far, the first of those awards of the fines was $15,000 that went to the Ingleside Foundation. That's a group that assists residents at Ingleside if their resources are not sufficient to cover the costs of continuing to stay at Ingleside. Another $4,500 went to Iona Senior Services, $12,000 to So Others Might Eat, $10,000 to Northwest Neighbors Village, $10,000 to Martha's Table, and $10,000 to Chattering Children. And so, as a result of our memorandum of understanding and our very close monitoring of the work that's being done at Ingleside, we've been able to give a substantial amount of money to nonprofits that will serve the district. The next announcement I had is a little bit further off, but it's the Chevy Chase Citizens Association cookie decorating. This is an annual holiday event, and they have holiday cookie decorating for children at the community center on December 15th from 1 until 4. And there will be nut-free and gluten-free cookies for children with allergies as well. And finally, just a note on a provision that was included in the last budget that the council passed that would provide some relief. I think it's about $3.7 million for nonprofits from the Clean Rivers impervious area charge that DC Water charges to all DC Water customers. And that is now being administered by the Department of Energy and Environment, and they held a briefing on November the 13th for all the nonprofits and others who were interested in this issue. And they're trying to develop some rules for exactly how that relief would be granted, under what circumstances, and which organizations get relief. And there were a couple of issues that came up that I just want to alert the Commission to and the community to that may require some attention at a later point. The relief is supposed to go to charitable and religious organizations, nonprofit, charitable, and religious organizations. But how they define those two terms is pretty loose, it seems. For instance, as Ingleside is a continuing care retirement community, almost exactly identical to Knollwood. They both serve exactly the same kind of function. Ingleside is classified as a charitable organization and therefore would be eligible for this relief. Knollwood is not. And I've asked them to give us an explanation for that and to see whether there is some way to change that, because it's obvious that both of those organizations should be treated the same and should be eligible for the relief. The second issue is that they have pretty radically different criteria for religious organizations versus charitable organizations. And I've raised the issue with them that that is possibly a constitutional issue violating the First Amendment establishment laws, and that I don't think they can, just on the basis of religion, say that that the religious organizations are going to have to have a lower hurdle to become eligible than a charitable organization. So those are two issues in the future that I think we may have to address at some later point. Okay, that's everything I've got. Becky?
Randy, I'm going to ask for your help here. We have a meeting this week for Lafayette Recreation Center, the modernization project, and I don't remember if it's Wednesday or Thursday, Randy, because we've batted it around a couple times.
It is Thursday.
Okay, so Thursday at 6, I believe, right?
6:30.
6:30 here in the community center for anyone who's interested, and this might be one of the last times you have input into the design for the recreation center in Lafayette Park. So if people are aware of it, there's a small field house there. They're going to expand it to be a recreation center, but not a huge one because we have the community center. So please come if you're interested. Thank you.
Abe? Shannon?
Yes, I just wanted to let my constituents know that if they're having issues with DDOT in terms of tree removal, I've got at least 3 constituents that I've been working with on tree removal issues. The fact that in the past, over the past several months, the trees were removed and not replaced. I just wanted to announce that you can email me or call me to let me know, and I will assist you with that process. An update on that issue is that they do plan to come back to our community, and their plan is, at least from November, they told me about a month ago, from November to January. That's what I've heard thus far. And I know that DDOT will be here this evening, so I hope that I can continue to work with DDOT on that issue. So I have gotten responses at least for 3 of my constituents, but wanted to let anyone else know that if that is an issue for them, that they can reach out to either the ANC or to Councilmember Todd or Che's office. Thank you.
Sure. I thought you were going to mention an update on the survey that Commissioner Clayman and I are doing to find out about the need for transitional space for programs in the community center, when it's going to be under renovation. Just an update. So far, we've received 15 responses from people that are responsible for those programs. We're still trying to get names and email addresses from other people. Maybe we could get some help from some people on that. We're still missing a couple of big programs such as dancing and gymnastics, but our goal is to get this information as soon as possible so we can start looking for resources to help us get this transitional space for these programs.
Okay. All right, community announcements. Anyone here from the mayor's office? Yes.
Hi, I'm Jessica, Ward 3.
Hi.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Hi, I'm Jessica. I'm from the mayor's office, Ward 3, Mokers. And the only update I was going to give, I was just going to make an announcement also about the Lafayette Rec Center modernization project meeting on Thursday. So, great, perfect.
Okay, Anthony.
No announcements.
No announcements.
No announcements.
I don't recall that ever happening
Could Anthony explain a little bit about Mary Chase stand on not opening the files for the rent or the eviction things? That was just on the listserv?
I would have to get back to you on that one.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anyone from Councilmember Todd's office? I don't see anyone. Okay, wow. Anyone else have any community announcements they'd like to make? Okay, great. We can go right on to DDOT. I see Sam Zimbabwe here. We welcome you, Sam, as always. Great to have you with us. Sam's been around at DDOT a long time, been to our commission many, many times before, and we appreciate all the good work that he's doing. We've got a number of issues to talk about with DDOT. The first is, and I'm going to turn this over to Abe to talk about more specifically, Abe and Shanda, because this affects their SMDs more acutely, but that's the steps DDOT is taking to address the increased traffic that's caused by the closure of Broad Branch, of Beach Drive, and Oregon Avenue. Oregon Avenue is currently open, but it's going to be closed again very shortly. So, do you want to introduce this?
Thank you, Randy. And Sam, thank you very much for attending our meeting tonight. We really appreciate it. We know it's sometimes late, and we appreciate you coming here to answer questions. Fundamentally, Beach Drive, as everyone knows, has been closed, at least one section, for some time, and there will continue to be construction there. Beginning in April and for the following 27 months, portions of Oregon Avenue will also be closed as the entire roadway is reconstructed and a number of improvements are made. And these are both very worthwhile projects. I don't want to deny that. Previously, there was also a DC water project on Oregon Avenue. And so these three projects together, along with any sort of other construction that may or may not be in the area, has really increased the traffic that is flowing through the Hawthorne neighborhood and parts of the Barnaby Woods neighborhoods, which are not typically highly trafficked neighborhoods, but have really become so because a few streets in particular have been used as detours. And a few residents here even noticed that some of the detours have produced their own detours because the detours themselves have become so crowded. There's a few people here tonight who have experienced this firsthand, who I'm sure you will hear from. And so I think what we've really been asking for over the last year is really some sort of comprehensive response, rather than say a stop sign here or a sign there. How are we really ensuring safety? How are we ensuring reasonable traffic flow? And how are we also then communicating any changes that are being made to residents? And I don't think that those I don't think those requests are unreasonable. I don't think anyone here expects no traffic or very, very little traffic. I think we all understand the need for detours, but we're just sort of left wanting more than what we've got. And so I hope that, Sam, you can address some of that tonight. And I think Shanda, if you have anything to add, we should do it.
Yes, I would just add to what Abe was saying regarding specific streets. And there's Utah Avenue as well, which I'm sure you may be aware of, which borders Commissioner Madak and I, that the traffic there has increased as well because of the road closures, as well as parts of my district, which include Nebraska and even a smaller street, Northampton. So those are areas as well where the residents have been affected, and I too, like Abe, just want to have that addressed in a more comprehensive manner.
Yeah. I think just, thank you, Shanda. I think just sort of specifically what we've noticed is Chestnut Street, Beach Street, Western Avenue, approaching those two intersections and approaching Pinehurst Circle in the morning are a few places. Are there other places in the morning, Shanda, that you've noticed?
Yes, as well as the residents from Tennyson Street are having a number of issues now. Tennyson Street as well is having a number of issues, not only with the commuter traffic, but with the tour of the bus route, and that's also impacting the Knollwood retirement community as well. So those are some of the main areas, but I would say overall it's really impacted all of our neighbors in this area. They've taken the brunt of the traffic because Oregon Avenue was or is a main thoroughfare in our district.
Yeah. So I think those streets that I mentioned in the morning, and I think in the evening in particular, really on Utah as it approaches Pinehurst Circle, and these are places that are not really designed to handle the amount of traffic that they're seeing, and it leads to both like a lot of backups in terms of time and inconvenience, but I think ultimately does become a safety issue because people are trying to get around the traffic, people get frustrated reasonably, and there's just a tremendous mass of cars in a very small area, and I think we need to just do a better job of managing it. I think hopefully the mayor wants.
Absolutely. So thanks for having me. Sam Zimbabwe, I'm the Chief Project Delivery Officer at DDOT, and there's 3 agenda items in a row, so I'll sort of give a kickoff overview and then I'll get into this one and we can go sort of each by each. There was a lot of issues that you guys wanted to talk about, so rather than having like half of DDOT come tonight, it's just me and Derek Voigt and Denise Jackson. So Derek's in our Traffic Operations and Safety Division and can help answer some of these questions, and then Denise is in our community engagement team, and I think you all know her well as well. So just to actually first to address the tree question, I think there's about 180 some odd trees scheduled to be planted in 3-4G this year, this planting season. Urban Forestry has a great index of all the trees and the locations and the species that are expected to be planted this year. We just entered planting season, so I'm sure if they have committed that they will be out here, they will follow through on that. When it does get really cold, we can't plant trees, so there's a certain period over the winter, if we don't get them in the ground before it's too cold, we won't be back until the spring, but I think we've already planted about 2,000 trees this planting season alone. There's a couple of projects, so Beach Drive, DC Water's work on Oregon Avenue, eventually our work on Oregon Avenue. There's also some work, I think, going on the Maryland side of the border that's affecting some of how people are getting from the Maryland side up to Western and up to some of these communities as well. Beach Drive is ongoing. We have some working with National Park Service and Federal Highways. We put in some signal timing adjustments, trying to keep traffic onto main arteries that are coming through the area. This segment 4 of Beach Drive is the lightest from a traffic perspective, understanding that there are still impacts in this community. So there's a few timings, mostly on the 16th Street side, that we're trying to keep sort of traffic that would usually use Beach Drive coming from a little bit farther to the east onto 16th Street, East-West Highway. There are some signed detour routes. We went out in response to this issue to do some observations, especially in the morning a couple weeks ago, looking at Oregon, Nebraska, some of the corridors there. So DC Water's out of the way right now. Oregon's back open, but there are a lot of other things going on. We saw most of the traffic still staying on sort of the state named roads, but there probably are, as you said, there are people cutting through and trying to find ways. One thing that happens for us often is when a detour route stops, it takes a little bit of time to find their way back to the way that they had previously gone. So we might see some people's that pattern continuing to change over time. We didn't see any specific areas of concern, like acute things. So getting this list of streets is helpful for us to go back out and take another quick look at. Like understanding that there are some backups and there are some operational things. There weren't necessarily. We didn't observe, not to say that they don't exist, but specific things like, oh, this thing needs to be addressed here. But that's something that, again, I want to be sensitive to. how people are experiencing that, and here these specific locations really helps us identify some things. I did bring copies for the commission, and I have a couple copies here. I did not bring enough for everybody, but I'm happy to distribute these. This is the detour plan, the segments of work that will happen with our Oregon Avenue project. So just so everybody's sort of aware, we can take a look and then pass it along. But there's 3 segments to our work. Our Oregon Avenue reconstruction will be all the way from Western to Military Road. There's 3 segments of that. Western to Beach is going to be the first section. Rittenhouse to Military is the second section, so the southern end, and then the middle piece will be the last section. So we section those off to try to minimize the traffic impacts overall and to try to manage those. So that first section really will only affect that very northern piece, and we'll try to look at how diversions happened through the Oregon Avenue project, through the DC Water project, but also be able to monitor these. Then there's the southern piece, that number 2 in this, going again from Rittenhouse down to Military, and then from Rittenhouse up to Beach will be the third. We don't yet have a timeline on exactly how long those are expected to be for each of those closures. We are getting close to advertising the project for construction, but once we have a contractor and a construction management firm on board, both of those, we'll be able to have a much more detailed construction schedule that we can communicate out to folks, and then be able to message any traffic shifts or changes that are coming out there. The idea is that the contractor will work in each of these sections exclusively, finish in those areas, and then move on to the next one. So that's a lot less impactful than trying to do all of the work along the whole of the corridor and sort of go down to one lane or something like that for the whole length of it. So we're trying to minimize the work by doing all the work in one section and then moving on to the next. Again, these are great to know about these specific streets that you want us to look at. I've also got cards for folks if you've got other just locations of concern. We're always happy to take those, and I'll pass it along to the folks that will be managing the construction. And then, a lot of this is a bit dynamic as construction starts on Oregon Avenue, as construction ends on Beach Drive. Things will change. That's sort of the nature of things, and so we won't set this detour plan and then walk away from it forever. We'll be happy to hear feedback as things keep going. So the more specific and detailed you can be about, like, hey, this is a problem, the better. I hear the concern about, like, what's the comprehensive plan. At this point, we haven't identified that there's a new signal is needed in some location or something like that. It's going to be about communication about those alternative routes. We dealt with this for a long time on Beach Drive in some very impacted areas a little bit farther towards downtown, and we're very happy to work with folks on how to adjust things.
Oh, that's good to hear, because one of the things that we did with the recent project with DC Water is, even though they had their initial detour plan, Commissioner Speck, Clayman, and I ultimately did a walkthrough with the project manager and the people who were on site to talk about the streets that were actually affected, and they ended up modifying some of the signage just based on the practical effects of what had happened. So we would like to be on record right now and to note that we would like to do the same thing with you for our residents, because there were some issues that arose with DC Water. They had a great plan, but they were just really amenable to working with us to work out those kinks and any roads that were really affected.
Okay, I'm sure that folks know about those changes, but I'll make sure that we connect with DC Water and also understand exactly what they did in changing the signage, so we don't start from bad information about where they started.
That would be great.
I think that was very helpful. It was also very helpful on their community outreach office. They routinely give us updates. I guess there's no analog for this with this project, but they allowed us to tour the site but they were just very communicative, and as things changed, they would let us know. And when Wayne was here recently discussing this project, he did mention that it's actually sort of 6 smaller projects in one. Each of these sections is one lane and then the other lane, and so presumably with each lane there will be potentially a different detour schedule involved. If you can only go north in section 1 or you can only go south in section 1, you're probably going to only use certain roads to detour. And so I think finding ways to communicate that, using the Chevy Chase listserv or letting us know so that we can, we very much appreciate it, because I think otherwise it's going to be somewhat confusing and probably only increase traffic.
And Wayne would have been here, but he's out of town tonight, so you get me instead. But yes, Wayne trains on top of these things, but we'll also have dedicated construction management support that will help with outreach and communication.
And then I think I'd just be somewhat remiss if I didn't just try and confirm that the expected timeline of this project is still 27 months. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
For the whole thing. About 27 months is the expected timeline for the full project to be done. Again, until we have a contractor on board to do the work, we don't know exactly what that timeline will be.
Let me get Commissioner's question.
Yeah.
Becky, you have anything? I have just a couple. One is with regard to Wise Road, because, and Abe knows about this more than I do, he can correct me, but my understanding is Wise Road is still open right now, and it's going to be open for another few months until sometime in the spring, but then it's going to be closed. And Wise Road is a cut through across there. That's going to change people's patterns significantly, I think, as well. That may be before or after. Right now, a lot of people are cutting through there using Wise Road, which has remained open. The other issue that I would call your attention to is at Military Road and Utah. And this will occur probably in phase 2. But right now, there is a left turn arrow and a left turn lane on Military going eastbound at Oregon.
No, 27th Street.
No, Oregon and Military Road. There is a...
Does Oregon go to Military Road?
Yes, Oregon goes right to Military Road, yeah. It's Utah, but it does, you're right, it's 27th Street up further, but...
On the other side of St. John's.
Yeah, other side of St. John's, but you're taking out a left turn there. If we're closing, whenever Oregon Avenue is closed northbound, whenever that occurs, you're going to shift a lot of the traffic, the left turn traffic from Oregon back up to 27th Street. And I know when that had happened once before, during the DC water closure, you had a lot of traffic there trying to turn left. There wasn't a protected signal there for left turn. There wasn't a lane for left turn, and that became a problem.
You're talking about turning left
From heading east on
Military
Road
to go north on 27.
Turning north on 27, correct.
Sam, would you like me to show you?
No, I know.
So, and that, again, as Shannon mentioned, there's a lot of traffic that's going to be coming up Utah. Utah is going to get a lot of that traffic. Whenever you close Oregon, Utah is going to get the traffic probably. And there's been a lot of complaints about speeding on Utah as well. And a lot of people have said, and I see it myself because I live a block off of Utah, and there are a lot of people who are speeding on Utah now. So I think that needs to be we need to pay attention to that too.
And some of those things, there might be issues that are there today that we don't need to wait until we have traffic diversions from construction to try to look into. So if there's concerns about some of those things, going through letting us know from the ANC is a helpful piece.
Okay.
I did have one last point. Our ANC a few months ago at this point did pass a resolution requesting a traffic control officer at Pinehurst Circle and Western. Really at any one of the intersections. Our initial thought was around more in the morning and the amount of traffic that's there, because it seems that the stop sign at at Pinehurst and Western is leading to a lot of the backup, and if that traffic was allowed to proceed, there would be less congestion on Western. Honestly, I think that circle seems to be sort of the nexus of a lot of problems, both in the morning and in the afternoon. And so our guess of the traffic control officer was the best that we could come up with. I mean, obviously this is something that DDOT does, but I think really just taking a long, hard look at that circle and what's happening there in the morning rush hour and the evening rush hour is really one of the number one things we're asking.
Okay, anyone else? Yes, yes, sir. Can you give us your name first?
My name is John. I live on Beach Street, right below the Chestnut. The segments that you identified for Oregon 1, 2, and 3, are those set in stone? Because having the segment stop and end on Beach Street means all these people are going to be going down Oregon, either northbound or southbound, and come to block and use Beach Street as a detour rather than Chestnut, which is the main thoroughfare for Hawthorne. Now, Beach Street is a beautiful street. It has 3 speed bumps. I would love 20 more speed bumps. I've got 2 young kids. The dogs rocks, the little, they run the streets. Youngest one's a year and a half old. I have stopped cars, especially St. John students. I love the cadets, but I'm also good friends with Principal Chris. He takes me to parking permits when I email. Having the segment stop and start on Beach Street is just, that makes us a detour. And if that can be adjusted to Chestnut, which is sort of our thoroughfare, I would be eternally grateful. Or have like the massive signs, road blocking signs, like local traffic only, that want to block the whole lane of traffic that were up on Oregon during the water. Something like that to stop and examine, because it's gotten out of control. I would love to try to have this next phase of construction lessen the impact on Beach Street, because that's what happened with the first phase of the water work, was that people would go up, find it was closed, and they'd be so frustrated that they would race down Beach Street. The street's really wide, so you can easily hit 50 miles an hour if you're mad. It's crazy. So, my piece of my life, you received it. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
I'm not going to commit one way or the other. I can look at that. I think some of the original sequencing was due to our projected timing with the DC water work. We're obviously not in that same timeline at this point. So, and some of what was going on with Beach Drive too. So, at this point, I think we'd have to get to having a contractor on board to figure out some of those things rather than try to resequence it in our heads. But certainly take that concern.
I think to John's point, I think it's also going to really play into what's happening on Wise Road, because most of the traffic that is using Beach or Chestnut as a detour is coming via Wise. And if Wise is closed, presumably there's going to be less traffic coming through. I would hope, but I think really trying to be really thoughtful about the sequencing, if not of 1, 2, and 3, then certainly of the northbound and southbound lanes, would be wise.
No comments.
Okay, yes, Thelma.
What kind of coordination are you planning to have, or will you have with the E6 bus? Because it will be diverted, I guess, some of this time.
Yeah, so we're very closely coordinated with WMATA about all of our construction projects and when there will be diversions of the bus and making sure people know what the routes will be and stop locations and things like that. So we work very closely with them to make sure they're able to plan and they're able to communicate as well as we are. Yes.
Yes.
Randy.
Right.
It looks from this like Oregon will be actually inaccessible for 27 months. Close to 55 minutes, you're not going to leave the whole lane and get anywhere. But, so that means the bus will be diverted probably down Tennessee for 27 months. And I had
stopping?
Pardon me?
The bus is not stopping?
No, traffic is not stopping.
Southbound traffic.
Going up
Okay.
and down Oregon, and that's, it's hard to get out of the cars. People trying to walk into the park, I mean, I saw somebody almost get hit. Of course, the deer are coming in and out of Northampton all the time too, and I think this is something they not get hit, because that's damaging to people as well. Now, originally, didn't you talk about the last time about having Oregon open in one lane the whole way through? Why was this changed? Because this, this is going to be, those of us living near Oregon, it's going to be a lot more inconvenience, since the whole thing is going to be closed for 7 months. Go back to where we were when Oregon was closed.
Yeah, that's true. So I think, and you'll have to forgive me for not knowing exactly the plans. I think that during each of these segments, there will be one lane, either northbound or southbound, open for most of the time. There may be points at which both lanes of each segment may need to be closed, but the idea is, so there will be some continuity throughout, but not entirely. So I think this is an area, like, as we get the contractor schedule, our construction management folks on board, we'll be able to make sure everybody understands exactly what's going to be going on where for each way. Because right now it's all like in this small font what is going on for each section. And that's still DC Water's work. I don't know the status of that. We can
Get a report recently from DC Water on that, and Shannon, you may be able to remember it better than I can, but my recollection is that there were some issues with regard to, I think, erosion, and they were going to have to substantially rebuild the road, and they were working with the Park Service on doing that. But they're definitely planning to reopen it, and it's a matter. I think they're going to have to do some engineering in order to be able to reconstruct it. Not years, I don't think, but months. It's not going to. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I can't hear anything you're saying. Could you speak up? Yes. I was saying that a group was to walk every day in that area of the park.
Yeah. Yeah, I understand that, and I know DC Water and the Park Service are addressing the issue. We'll try to push them along as quickly as we can.
Yes, Randy, you are correct. We received a letter or email from Tanya Hedgepeth, who's the project coordinator for our area, just saying that she wanted to provide the latest update, and unfortunately the project will not commence again until the spring of 2019. Due to the weather, the asphalt plants are all closing and will not open again until spring. For now, Bingham Drive will remain closed to the public to drive on, but the trails are open for public use. We had hope we could complete this project by month's end. However, we anticipate to commence the work in March 2019 and be fully complete with the restoration of Bingham Drive by May 2019. So that was the latest update that we received on November 16th from DC Water.
I had forgotten that. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Sure. I'm Michelle Cooper, and I actually live on Pioneer Circle in Utah, so this increased traffic that's been coming through has been somewhat disruptive to me as I walk my dog several times a day, and I have young kids who want to ride their bikes to school, but I have to drive them to school and contribute to the traffic congestion because it's not safe for them, because we don't have sidewalks on Utah. There's a portion of Utah, there are 2 blocks where we have sidewalks and aren't appropriate crosswalks for the half of that circle spoke to lead into the circle. So a lot of kids who come from Hawthorne and Berkeley Woods to Lafayette Elementary School, the largest elementary school in the district, less than a mile from that intersection, they drive, they contribute to the traffic overflow instead of being able to walk or ride their bikes without sidewalks. And it seems like it is going to be a 9-quarter extension of a project contributing to increased traffic that
So what, excuse me, what are the areas where you want sidewalks? In Pinehurst Circle?
Utah.
On Utah?
There's a stretch of 2
Right.
blocks between the circle and between, I think Barnaby Street is where it is up on Utah Avenue. 33rd Street also does not have sidewalks for that 2-block stretch right off Pinehurst Circle, but it doesn't have like the same volume of traffic. So that's something to look into, I would think, not quite as urgently, but I think it would help address like concerns about public safety. And how it would be some of the traffic as well as people head down to the school.
Sure. I'd be happy to take one of those. And we do have a separate project where we can install easier sidewalks to install. I know, and we've also got work ongoing on Chestnut to install sidewalks on one side of Chestnut as well. Again, there's timing for all that, and as you said, sometimes that's an engagement process. It takes a little bit of us assessing what's available in public space and how difficult or easy it is to.
I submitted my first request for a traffic control study in June of 2017. So this has been rambling on the system for quite some time.
I'd be happy to.
Learned though that sidewalks take a long, long time.
Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but yes, they often do.
And we did, we also had the traffic response sign on Utah and Van Hazen that shows people how fast they go because cars are zipping down the street at 44 miles an hour and 25 mile per hour zone. We also took several weeks to change that sign to show miles per hour instead of kilometers per hour. And Detroit Tribune was blocking the sign.
Get them to go slow, even slower if they think they're going.
This is great, I can just zip right through. And, no, that's not the way it's it's felt like a bit of a complicated error because there's a long stretch of time where people are particularly vulnerable to that. That's all we have done.
Okay.
If you might create a person compilation of data and stats to try to help you make that as much.
If you have 2 copies, Derek will take one and I will take one too.
Okay, we're going to need to move on to our next topic with DDOT. This is DDOT and 5333 Connecticut. We want to first of all, I guess, recognize that we've got Troop 100.
252.
252? Oh, excuse me. Troop 252, the Boy Scouts who just joined us, and we appreciate having you here. We've got an alumnus from your troop who was an alumnus, I guess, what, a century ago? Okay. All right, the next topic we're going to address is, oh yes.
Please protect yourself. Because the folks in Silver Spring will come down Georgia Avenue, turn right on 16th Street, come right down to that circle, turn right on North Pole, and come across Wise Road. The day they find this is explosive, they're going to be bitching to Congressman Jamie Raskin and Senator Van Hollen. Make sure their departments know it and those 2 offices know it. To protect yourself in advance.
Okay. The next issue on our agenda also involves DDOT, but I think somewhat to a lesser extent in some respects, because we've had a number of issues that have been boiling over for about 5333 Connecticut for several months now, and we thought it would be a good idea to just try to get all of them together at one point and see if we couldn't address them simultaneously. Some of them relate to work DDOT's done, some of them relate to issues for the management at 5333 Connecticut. And Patrice Bourgon, I thought that was you. She's here from Mizuto, the manager of 5333 Connecticut. And what I would propose to do is I've divided them up. I think there are about 6 issues that we've got 6 issues. And I'm the only one on the commission who has the full history here, because I was on the commission. I think I'm the only one who was on the commission when 5333 Connecticut first began. And so I'm going to sort of take the lead here, even though it's not in my single-member district, because I do have the history and I understand what's happened before. The first issue is with regard to exiting from the garage and turning right and going down the alley that's behind 5333 Connecticut and goes to Chevy Chase Parkway. We were concerned about that at the time the building was being designed. And that's an extraordinarily narrow alley. And we were concerned that tenants would come out of the garage and zip down that alley to get out to Chevy Chase Parkway or any other points because of the traffic on Military Road, frankly, that people wouldn't want to go on Military Road. So we included a provision in our memorandum of understanding that said that traffic would not be allowed to make that right turn out of the garage and into the alley. And to prevent that, the management would install what we called a pork chop, a little raised area of concrete that would prevent cars, or impede cars at least, from turning right toward that alley. And also that there would be signage instructing people not to go that direction. When the pork chop was installed, I went out there right after it was installed, and I took pictures of it and I sent it to the constructor at the time, who was still there, and said, I told them that it wasn't going to stop people from making that turn, and that this was going to be no impediment at all because it wasn't high enough, it wasn't located in the right place. Nevertheless, that was the way they did it. Also, they did, after a period of time, put up the no right turn sign. That has, for a period during the summer, that was down. I don't know why it was down, but there was no sign there for a while. And there have been a lot of concerns that have been raised by the residents on either side of that alley, that they can't come out of their garages there. They're having a hard time parking there because people are just zipping down the alley, exiting from 5333 Connecticut. So I think that what we would like to do is talk about whether there are some solutions to this that can further discourage residents at 5333 Connecticut from taking that route out. Now, it's connected with the DDOT issue, I think, which is exiting onto Military Road. And Sam and I have gone around on that one for a while, and we did eventually get signs there that prohibited any left turn from the alley onto Military Road, or any left turns from Military Road into the alley. I'm told by nearby residents that that's regularly ignored and that people are not paying attention to it. I had one other resident at 5333 Connecticut who contacted me and said that part of the problem there is that people coming out of the alley on the Military Road can't see the oncoming traffic because of cars parked there, and that was a problem. And so it's sort of, we've got to look at this holistically to see whether there's a way to make it easier for people to get out of the garage onto Military Road and to avoid going down that narrow alley, which is going to create additional problems both for the residents and ultimately, I think, for people who they're going to go down there and have accidents or whatever. So that's the issue, and I'd like to hear from both Bozzuto and from Sam as to what you think might be done to address that.
Can I just ask one clarifying question?
Sure.
In a perfect world, how do people get out of the garage? Where should they go?
They should go, make a left turn out of the garage, make a right turn onto Military Road. That was always the expectation.
Got it. And if they want to go west of
they would go down, they'd have to go down to Nevada or to Chevy Chase Parkway, some other street to take that back over to Connecticut or wherever they want to go.
And there's no access to Kanawha?
No.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
It's a big grade change. So I can talk a little bit about this I'll also defer. I mean, there's a number of DDOT issues. I'm happy to go through all of them. Or if you want to wait, just touch this one first, and then.
Just let's deal with each one individually.
Okay. So, you want to start with the what you're doing on the people coming out of the garage?
Well,
You can show me.
Patrice Gorgoni. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't know I was going to be a speaker tonight. So we can alert the residents, maybe put some, some e-blasts to the residents to remind them that they should not be making that right-hand turn and going down the alleyway. Honestly, other than doing, making the residents aware, it's hard to kind of prevent people just doing it on their own. So, kind of coming up with an idea together would be great to kind of figure that out, to stop them going down that alleyway, honestly. But we can remind them.
So, I would agree. I think there's limits to what can be done in terms of like preventing that. The agreement between the ANC and the developer at the time, talked about that being banned. A lot of that is on private property, so there's not like a DDOT jurisdiction to be able to do anything. We can't, because of how the alley works, for people who live back onto it in single-family houses, things to prevent them from getting out would also affect them, because it's a very narrow alley and it's hard to circulate through it. Trash pickup and stuff like that is a challenge. In terms of people coming out onto Military Road, again, I've got a couple of handouts. So there's one sheet for everybody. As we've looked at this, and Derek also has some additional handouts, and I know Derek's been here in the past months talking about Chevy Chase Parkway and Military Road too. Some of the same principles are in place here at the alley. So there's probably three things that can be done, and two of them are illustrated here. The third is a bit more drastic, so before we put pen to paper, we wanted to sort of float the idea. The first is to provide a little bit more sight line, as you said, that people have a hard time when they're exiting from the alley onto Military Road, they have a hard time seeing. And so this shows pulling back about 20 feet of parking on either side of the alley to provide better visibility for folks. That's most important on the upstream side, the side to the west of the alley. But I think, frankly, people, even if they're turning right, being able to see what's coming from the other side, because that is a pretty tight turn to be able to make it into the lane without crossing the other line. The second is to change the lane shift. The lane shift is really, really abrupt as you come across Connecticut and have to shift back around the left turn pocket. It's very, very tight, especially if there's a car parked right at the very end of that. It comes up very quickly. And so, it's a non-standard lane shift. We would prefer to have that smoothed out a little bit so that people are not surprised by the car coming across. And if you do it regularly, you're not surprised by it. But if you don't, I think you are. And then you sort of have people coming down have a hard time seeing what's ahead of them for people exiting from the alley, and they have a little bit less reaction time. So this would be another shift, sort of at the other end, to smooth that out a little bit. The third, which is, again, not illustrated yet, but as we were discussing sort of ways to do this, there's about 10 or 11, room for 10 or 11 spaces, about 190 feet overall of parking on the south side of the block there, between the alley and Connecticut. Removing all of that parking would enable us to do two things. One, it would clear up that sight line completely, and people coming out of the alley would be able to see what's coming towards them. It would also enable us to lengthen the left turn bay at Connecticut, which is one of the things that contributes to the backup, the queue that comes westbound, particularly in the evening, I think, but we can get it at both peaks. So lengthening that bay would help with visibility and also with some of the operations, which ripples down to Chevy Chase Parkway down there. So that's a bigger change. Any of these changes would require us to do a notice of intent, and just to make sure everybody knows and go through that whole process. So we're not talking about an immediate change to any of these, but we wanted to present all three of those options for discussion, and both here or follow up in the future too.
Well, as the person that's primarily been working with Derek on the Chevy Chase Parkway, we've had some of these discussions before, and a lot of what you're talking about are the same things that we've talked about here, but it would be very hard to do one thing without 100% addressing the improper issuance of residential parking permits for the residents, because that would then spill over into the neighborhood and people would start complaining about that. So if I don't think we could look at them in isolation. They have to be looked at together as part of the solution for the same problem.
Absolutely.
Let's wait. We'll get to that in just a second. I do want to deal with this because I like the idea of having a better left turn lane, because right now there's barely room for maybe 3 cars there in the left turn lane, and that is frequently a backup in the mornings particularly. And so a longer left turn lane, a better entrance into that left turn lane, all of those things would be very helpful. But I defer to Jerry and to Dan about the parking implications, because there's a shortage of parking in this whole neighborhood. So people, I think, would be concerned about losing that many parking spaces.
And in terms of that left turn lane, I live closer than any of the other commissioners to that street. There are often cars that drive the entire block on the opposite side of the road because they see those 3 spaces for the left turn are empty, and they don't want to wait forever to get to them, so they're driving on the other side of the road all the time. It's constant.
So Sam, you're going to go through the process of analyzing these and then come with a proposal? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think the baseline, what's shown here is something that we would like to move forward with regardless. Either thing will require a notice of intent.
Right.
So we could start with this, and then if there's still concerns, come back with a different plan. We could start with the bigger plan. It's hard for us to put out sort of options under a notice of intent framework, but we want to work with folks, and I can address the RPP question as well.
We'll talk about that in a second,
and talk about sort of how to go from here. So we're not wedded to either one. We think this has a lot of safety benefits.
Right.
But as we were discussing, going that step further, trying to think of something that would solve potentially multiple problems. We came up with this other idea, which is not yet shown, but it's about 190 feet, which is about 10, 11 parking spaces, depending on the size of the car.
Okay, I see Patrice nodding her head. But,
well, I was going to say, at a bare minimum, when you're coming, I've driven out that alleyway many a times. Going left is not even an option. I mean, it's almost packed, but it is very hard to see on both sides, and it's hard to turn. So just having that leeway there on both sides would be a huge help.
Yeah, I think that would help you in convincing residents to take that exit rather than going down the alley. If we made it easier on people. Okay, that's. I think we ought to explore that and move ahead with that. Okay, any other comments, suggestions about that issue? Okay, we'll move on to the next one, which is the residential parking permits. And this one, I think, is more a DDOT issue than a building management issue. In our original agreement, KFRITS agreed that they would ask DDOT to restrict the ability of tenants in the building to obtain residential parking permits. KFRITS did that, and DDOT agreed. That was in May of 2015. And then in May of 2018, DDOT advised us that, in Sam's words, a handful of people, roughly 10, ended up with parking permits despite the agreement, and it was because of a problem with coordination with DMV. So we've asked again for an update on that, and particularly now that those permits are at renewal time. And where does that stand now? Are we going to get rid of that problem now?
Sure. So, you probably like it. You don't have to stand. There's the rest of them are all DDOT. I think they're all the rest of them are DDOT. So, yes, so the exchange of letters happened back in 2015. We did work with DMV to remove it at that point. There seems to be some database issue that came up, and I'll try to explain what that is. The way that the RPP system works is DDOT maintains a database, and we communicate that to DMV so that when people apply for their registrations, they have the option, if they're on an eligible block, to purchase an RPP sticker. The 5300 block is confusing of Connecticut because it's actually 3 blocks. There's 50, the 5333 is actually on the 3rd block of the 5300 block. So when KFRITS requested to be taken out of the system, we removed it, but when the communication went over to the DMV, I think it was confusing about exactly which section of that to remove just the odd numbers from, right? So the even numbers on the other side of the street are still eligible. And we can really only remove a block from the database when the entirety of the block requests to be removed. So it seems like what was happening, either maybe the whole thing got removed and then people south of the 5330 block, which is the last block, said, hey, wait a second, why can't I get my permit? So that they were still eligible. So I don't know exactly what happened, but when we got made aware of this back in April, we corrected it with DMV. The last block, only the even side of Connecticut is in the system now at the 5330 block. It's hard for us to rescind the registrations because it's part of people's registration, it's on their sticker. It's hard, we could send them a new sticker, but there's nothing to compel anybody to take it off and put the new sticker on that says no RPP. And they'd have to process refunds, blah, blah, blah. So nobody will be able to renew their registration with an RPP sticker, but those registrations that did have it are maybe staggered. And so I don't know exactly, I did not get yet an update on how many, if any, are still active, but since April, no new ones should have been issued because we corrected the problem. So there may be some, the residents may start to complain as they try to renew their stickers, and we'll have to have that discussion with them when that happens. But those RPP permits will continue to be in effect until they need to be renewed, or until somebody moves or sells their car or whatever else it is that they're no longer have a valid registration. But there are not many of them out there. And it's a limited universe that will continue to get smaller.
Less than 10 now?
I think so. I'll follow back up and try to confirm.
Okay.
Just to reiterate what I said before, it would be very hard to get rid of all the parking spaces all those people still had.
Understood. And we're past, just in terms of timing of this, it will be the spring before we can make marking changes, similar to what DC Water experiences with asphalt plants closing. We can't do lane markings in the winter either because of temperatures. So we're talking about a spring change for a lot of these things.
But that's not going to stop us from doing what we agreed to do with the Chevy Chase Military Road intersection, with getting rid of spaces, correct?
I think so. The Chevy Chase Military Road.
Yeah, I mean, getting pavement markings obviously can't happen.
some of the flex posts and the lane markings. I mean,
You had indicated that 30 feet of parking was going to be removed on both the east and the west side of the Military
Yeah,
Road.
we're going to move forward with that. That's an easy sign change, and we'll deal with the pavement markings as well. We can eradicate the markings,
yeah,
we just
yeah.
can't add new ones.
Okay.
So we'll deal with any additions that need to happen after the fact, or come spring, but we can do the eradication and relocate the sign.
Okay, great,
It's
thank
like
you.
the center line shift that we're talking about.
Right, and that also has to do with that ANC.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, any other, Alan?
I'm Alan Siegel. I'm a member of the parking task force in this ANC. Just observe that if this problem continues, there is a way for us to get remote access to a commercial database which will allow us to take down the license tag numbers of cars parked in the vicinity and run those to identify whether they indeed are residents in that building.
Okay, thanks, Alan. All right, the next issue is with regard to the removal of two street trees that are in front of 5333 Connecticut, and this is also a part of our agreement. Originally, I'm not to it yet, or I'm taking them in a little bit different order. Yeah, a little bit different order, I guess, because I was doing the ones that were included in the. Yeah, I've got it. This was part of our original agreement that we would support a circular drive if K-Fritz could assure us that they would take every reasonable step to preserve the street trees. We didn't want to lose the street trees. Then we subsequently went through the public space permit process for that circular drive. The ANC supported it with the condition that it had to be approved by Urban Forestry. Urban Forestry did approve it, but also said that if the trees did not survive for 5 years, that if they died during that time period, that K-Fritz would then be responsible for removing and replacing. Urban Forestry has determined that the trees did die, or are in the process of dying, and they do need to be removed for safety reasons. I understand that a permit application has been filed, and I don't know what the status of that is at this moment.
Yeah. So, great summary. I think we had the same concerns, Urban Forestry, about what would happen during the construction. So, I think they did take precautions, but they're just, I mean, they hand excavated around there, but really with mature trees like that, there was too much disturbance. So they have to go through the street tree removal process, which includes paying permit fees, then removing the trees at their expense, and then reinstalling 2 new street trees at their expense as well. So the permit has been filed. It's being reviewed. I think last I saw, there were some comments on the traffic control plan for how to maintain pedestrian traffic while all that work is getting done. But it's moving forward. They will have to then pay the fees, which I think end up being, in this case, like around $14,000 or something like that for the size of the trees. And then proceed with removing the trees and then installing the new ones. So that should be able to be done within this planting season. It'll be a little bit up to them about when exactly they do that.
Is there any indication of what kind of tree is going to, or what size tree is going to be?
I don't know the answer to that, but we can follow up. I mean, I think they would have to do it at our direction, so whatever Urban Forestry deems appropriate.
Okay, if somebody could get back to us and let us
Sure.
know what the plan is for that.
Sam, can I ask one question about that?
Sure.
If I was to cut down a street tree myself, I would presumably be fined.
Yes.
What would the fine be approximately? Is that something related to the circumference of the
Yes, yeah, so the permit fees are based, if you do it legally, you have to pay, and if you do it illegally, you also have to pay.
There's no difference.
The fee is based on the circumference of the tree.
Yeah, but there's no difference whether I did it.
I think there are some punitive differences for doing unpermitted work.
But this wouldn't fall into that category.
This would not be, they're going through the permitting process right now. And as Commissioner Speck said, this was something that when the circular driveway was approved through the Public Space Committee, this concern was raised both by the ANC and by DDOT, which had some unusual measures that were placed on this permit because of everybody's concerns about what would happen in the future. And unfortunately, what we thought might happen happened. So I think we protected ourselves as well as we could, given the issues out there.
Okay, the next issue that I'd like to take up, and we're going to get to the streetlights, is the Capital Bikeshare station. In the agreement that we had with K-Fritz, they said that they would offer to provide the installation of a bike share station, but it would have no obligation if, after a reasonable effort, K-Fritz determined that there were logistical or locational considerations that made it impractical, or if the offer to install a bike share station was not accepted. We really were trying to push this because we thought this was going to be good for tenants at 5333 Connecticut, and it would also benefit neighbors nearby. We're going to have another bike share station, which would be valuable for the whole community. As I understand it, there were some discussions in spring of 2017, and DDOT conducted a site visit, met with Bozzuto representatives to discuss possible options for siting a bike share station near the property, and the best option was going to require a concrete pad to be installed. And then DDOT said they didn't have the funding to do that. On May 26th, I believe Bozzuto informed DDOT that ownership of the 5333 Connecticut was not interested in pursuing a bike share station at this point in time. I'd just like to see whether there's a way to revisit that and see whether there now would be an interest in doing that. I think it would be certainly a valuable asset for the building as well as for the community to have that. And I don't know, DDOT I don't think has anything more that they can say about this other than they've already said that it's going to require a concrete pad to be installed.
Yep, and I'll just say right now we don't have DDOT expansion right now in Chevy Chase plan, like in the broader community plan. We're finishing a 3-year expansion that was sort of announced in 2016. And we're starting a new round of planning for what our next phase of public expansion is. As that process goes on, we certainly take ideas. I mean, we have the one right out here across the street. But if there's other ideas for locations around that would be helpful,
we do have
to take that. But nothing has changed about what we would need in terms of installing a station.
We do have one more bike share station that's going to come up at our next meeting.
Okay.
And that is at Lafayette School, Lafayette Elementary.
Okay.
And I think when they built the design, Becky, you know more about this maybe than I do, I don't know. But they were anticipating that they might have a bike share station there.
Okay.
Is that right? No?
But there's no plaza there.
Yeah, there is a place to put it. There's a place to put it. Anyway, that's going to be our next meeting. We'll let you know about that. But would the management at 5333 Connecticut be interested in continuing to explore this and see whether there's a possibility to do that?
Absolutely. Our take on it was that they tried to go through the process, and it wasn't that K-Fritz refused to do it.
Yeah.
The impression was that we were denied.
Oh.
So that was our thought process. So.
Okay, well, we'll get your contact information after.
Okay.
Make sure that.
Okay. I just want to make sure there's communication going. Yes.
I'm Tom,
I know.
Commissioner in Friendship Heights, and I know sort of spearheaded it 6 years ago, we had to expand beyond Van Ness. The email from Capital Bikeshare essentially said they were no longer interested in putting a bike share station there. So what you're saying is provably true. And the concrete pads are $2,000. If you DDOT identify the location, you're not honoring that commitment.
Okay,
So I
so
expect
just so
you
you
guys-
know, the Zudo was here to manage the building. We were not the developers of the building, and we didn't go through this planning process.
No.
So we were doing what Caperidge told us to do. I'm happy to pass the information along.
Yeah, I don't want to
I'm happy to do that.
create antagonism here. What we want to do is try to work this out.
Yeah.
See if we can get a
So
solution.
DDOT identifies sites. There's a site at the corner. They also identified a site across the street, which I presume your ANC would be amenable to going across the street. Functionally, that would fill the gap in the system just as well. So they identified a site adjacent to the property, they identified a site across the street, and the answer was, I don't know the exact language, we were no longer interested in putting in a bike share table, essentially the answer from Zudo or Cape Fritz. Somebody,
It was from Zudo.
basically said they didn't want to move forward with it, which was not simply making the community agree with the ANC.
I will pass along information.
I don't think he wants to get out that the developer doesn't honor their commitments. That is a
agree.
very liability problem moving forward as a city. And I would certainly make sure it gets out if that's what happens here in the end.
Okay, thank you, Tom. All right, next item then is, and this one I don't know whether DDOT has anything to say about this one or not. I doubt it, because I think this is all on private property. But there have been a number of concerns raised by people who live whose houses back onto the alley down to Chevy Chase Parkway, who haven't been able to get into into the alley because there have been cars or trucks, more likely trucks, blocking the alley immediately behind 5333 Connecticut. These are trucks, I think, loading or unloading, deliveries, those kinds of things. And we've also had a meeting in November 2017. One of the residents and I met with Lieutenant Hill at the 2nd District MPD, and they said that they would, we had some photographs as well, and they said that they would monitor this. I just wanted to call that to your attention as well and see if, I think it's not as big a problem now. I think that it has, perhaps because we're not moving in as frequently now, but that alley needs to stay open so that people can get by. That's the only concern there.
Right. So, and again, I'll bring this up to the Caperidge, because that's our loading dock area.
Right.
So, I don't know how we can't use the loading dock, you know, that's how people move in.
Well, frequently I think you can use a loading dock without blocking the alley too. There are some trucks that block the alley unnecessarily, perhaps. Okay? All right. Okay, the last issue, and Becky can talk about this as well, is that my recollection is that when, and this was not a part of our memorandum of understanding, but my recollection is that as part of the construction, Caperidge was required to replace the streetlights on Military Road on their side of the street because they had done a lot of the construction there, and so they had to replace them. They replaced them, my recollection is, according to DDOT specifications. Is that right, Becky?
Yeah, I think they had leeway in what they could do. They did Washington globes as opposed to streetlights, and that's part of the problem.
Okay. And why don't you explain the problem?
Okay, so they put up some kind of, not exactly the Washington globes, but the 360 lights. And as soon as they went in, we started getting complaints from people who live on the far side of Military. And so I was working with Mr. Baga, and he was getting them shielded for us. Well, Caffridge shielded the side to their building and didn't shield the side to the neighborhood. So I was still working with Mr. Baga, and he was checking on whose responsibility that would be because they weren't installed by DDOT. And then, of course, he left, and he was trying to find someone to hand it to, and there wasn't really anybody who took his place at that time, and it kind of fell off the plate. So I'm still getting complaints against about the lights because they're really bright. Number one, right, because the LED issue, especially in RNC, is a hot button topic. And I know that there's a mayor's advisory street light committee now that I understand that the residential streets are going to be 2700K. And I think these are much brighter, so we'd like to still get those shielded so they're not keeping the neighbors across the street up at night. Because with those lights, there's light trespass all over the place. They're not directional. And that was promised a long, long time ago.
Okay, so we did install some shielding in the lights in 2017. It sounds like we may have done it on just one side. It's not, we have to go back to the manufacturer to get sort of shielding. So the streetlight team is out doing an assessment right now, not like right now, but in the next week or two, and we can follow up with what they find about how to install additional shielding. I'll make sure they understand that the concern is really from the north side of the street, not
Right. I'm sure it helped their residents in their building,
Yeah.
but the complaint was from the neighbors,
Yeah,
not from the
absolutely.
residents.
And they're going to check out the brightness as well and see what.
Great, thank you.
All right. That's great. Okay, I think we're going to go then to the next and the last of the DDOT issues that we have on our agenda tonight. And that is, Abe is one that raised this particularly, I think, as a result of some posts on our listserv, or community listserv, about the hawk light that's at Connecticut and Northampton. And again, I have some background because I've been involved in this for a while. But most recently, on August 15th, I sent this to you, Sam, as well, that a pedestrian was struck at the crosswalk. And that's triggered a lot of concerns raised by people in the community. That intersection, that crosswalk has been a problem for a long time. It originally had red flags that you would carry across the street to stop the traffic, and that did not work as effectively as we had hoped. And in November 2012, this commission unanimously passed a resolution urging DDOT to install expeditiously a hawk light there. And they talked about the number of pedestrians across there. It's a very important access point for the Avalon Theater, or for the community center, or for the library. And there had also, then, I think in October of 2012, there had been another pedestrian accident that had triggered that concern. And when it was installed, the explanation we got was that this was from George Branyan, that this intersection would not qualify under the engineering standards for a full stoplight, that it didn't have enough pedestrian usage to qualify for that. But they did conclude that it needed something there, and the hawk light was the solution. And I went back and looked, and actually hawk lights have been used in the district for a long time, back to 2009, I think. And there's several now in our neighborhood. One, I think, another one just down Connecticut Avenue, and then one down at the Uptown Theater, and then over on Nebraska Avenue at American University, just in our neighborhood. And some of the concerns that people have raised is that drivers are confused by the hawk light, and that they don't know what to do. And I don't know whether there's a solution for better signage, better education, or something like that. But clearly, it's important to protect pedestrians as best we can. And this intersection has been a problem area for a long time. And in keeping with the district's Vision Zero plan, desire to protect pedestrians and vehicular traffic, we'd like to do whatever we can to try to prevent those problems in the future. And so we'd just like your thoughts about what, if anything, can be done with that intersection now.
Sure. This is a good question. So there's a couple things I want to make sure I get out there. So one is, if anybody's ever in a crash, if they're in a crash in a car as a pedestrian, please report it to the police, because the only way that we get information about the details of the crash is if they end up as a police report that then comes to DDOT in a database that we get from MPD on a nightly basis, right? We're connected into MPD's database, but only what MPD knows. So somebody saying like, oh, I got, self-reporting to your ANC commissioner is good, but really we need to have it as a crash, as a piece of data that we can then use going forward. So when this did come in from you, Commissioner Speck, we had a reevaluation of what are called signal warrants. So there's certain standards that need to be met. In this case, it's actually not the number of pedestrians. The number of pedestrians is what qualifies the intersection for a hawk signal. There's not enough car traffic to make it a warranted full signal. So on Northampton, right? There's plenty of car traffic on Connecticut. So we recommissioned that. There really is still not enough car traffic for there, or the other factors. So the factors include crash history. There have not been vehicular crashes. There haven't, in the last few years, been pedestrian crashes that ended up in the police database. So understanding that there may be driver confusion or sort of close calls or problems, but they haven't ended up as crashes for us. We do think that there might be some ability to take away some of the signs that are not related to the hawk signal and move them someplace else, because there's a lot on the pole, and making sure that the trees are trimmed back so there's visibility. But when we did observations as part of this reevaluation, we saw generally the drivers complying with the hawk signal. So what happens when a pedestrian calls for a hawk is that the signal communicates to the upstream and downstream signals. There's a signal, I think about 350 feet one way, 400 feet the other way. This is sort of right in the middle. It coordinates with those, and then it gives a yellow signal, red signal, and then after the pedestrian that activated that, at a certain point when they get across, the signal starts to flash red, which means that a driver can stop and then proceed if it's safe to do so, if there's not a pedestrian in the crosswalk. It continues to be an education challenge. We now have about 17 or 18 hawks around the city, which is one of the most of any place in the East Coast. I think the drivers, we often have a lot of folks that are not from the district driving and have a hard time. Montgomery County has done something very different with the way that they do these pedestrian signals, and they don't look exactly the way that ours do. So we do continue to have education challenges. I know that as we've installed hawks in other neighborhoods, we've also done, we've handed out leaflets. We've got leaflets at the DMV. We continue to put out information on this, and we'll continue to do so. I think people are more and more used to them, but we have seen, overall across the city, we've seen very good compliance with hawk signals, but it actually does vary even where you are in the city about how good the compliance is for them. So when we did the reevaluation, we still didn't see a warrant for a full signal being met, but we saw continued very high pedestrian. Actually, I think the pedestrians crossing Connecticut exceed the number of cars coming out of Northampton in a peak hour in the evening. So, I think it's still the right solution. There are a few little things that we can do about removing signs and decluttering a little bit, and we'll continue education overall.
You did mention one of the problems, the flashing red light. Sometimes there are a lot of older residents that might not get across the street as quickly as that's said for.
Okay.
And I've seen that any number of times, that it starts flashing red while somebody is still in the crosswalk. And it starts flashing red, which means proceed with caution.
Right.
And people are still in the crosswalk. I don't think it's taking into account. It might be set for a timing for an average crossing of the street, but it might need to be adjusted for a longer length of time.
Okay, yeah, that's good feedback. We'll take that back. Usually all of our pedestrian crossing times are standardized to about, I think, 3.1 feet per second is the measure. But we'll make sure it's at that point and see if there's any adjustments to be made for the population that's crossing.
There aren't many of these on, a lot of the ones that I've seen around DC are not 6-lane roads.
Yeah.
And this is one of the only ones that I'm aware of that's a 6-lane road. So I think some adjustment might be needed.
Okay. Yeah. The other one, the next closest one, I think, is down in Cleveland Park. There's another one on Connecticut down in Norway.
One in Nebraska.
speak up? I can't hear you.
Oh, sure, the street parking on the one side south of Cleveland Park, I think are a little broader and deeper, so it's a little easier to see as a driver.
Yeah.
Because I know this one, I didn't even realize myself that, so.
Isn't it wider at Cleveland Park? The actual crosswalk?
It's very wide, just because of where it is, and that I think it's especially wide mid-block.